I have the honour, once more, of starting off the panel for the day's discussion. I much look forward to our debates, our deep inquiry into virtues and vices in the ancient world, the medieval world, and the modern world. I'm a classicist, so I'm starting way back in the deep recesses of history in the Greek and Roman world. So a natural place for us to start is with the very words that are on your programme, virtues and vices. What is a virtue? Well, if we look at the word, we end up going through French into Latin to the concept of virtus. Virtus, what is that? Well, it's the essence of being a man. So in the Roman world, virtus meant nothing along the lines of virtue in some rather grander sense. It meant the quality of being a true Roman. As for vitium, that's the word that gives us vice. That simply meant having a flaw or a blemish in your character. So this doesn't take us very far, does it? If we want to understand virtue, the words themselves are telling us it means to act like a Roman man and not mess it up. But I put it to you that if you attempted to recreate in the modern world a Julius Caesar or a Cicero as your ethical code, the output would be somewhat awkward. So the Romans aren't going to help us. Instead, we need to leap over them further back in time into the ancient Greeks. And as it happens, the Western literary tradition begins with the Greeks, and more particularly with the epic poems of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. What do they tell us about virtue and about vice? Well, there is a word that is commonly translated as virtue in the Greek, Aretē. And that word occurs in Homer and all the way through Greek. But again, it's wrong to translate that as virtue and assume that it has a moral characteristic. Aretē in Greek means excellence in the sense of doing the thing you are meant to do well. Now, that may be something moral, such as being, let's say, a loyal partner, but it could simply mean being strong as a warrior, being cunning as a general, being eloquent as a speaker. All of those are aretē, or excellences, in the ancient Greek world. So the Homeric poems instead give us a heroic code of morality. And that doesn't add up to a very virtuous picture. If you're a woman, you are to stay at home. There is no virtue to be found outside the home. If you're a man, it's the reverse. You win virtue in public activity, especially violent public activity. For the hero, you gain kleos, you gain glory by killing on the battlefield as many people as possible, and you achieve a beautiful death, a kalos thanatos, by being killed on the battlefield. And that's really all you've got to enjoy in life. So the heroic world doesn't take us very far into the elements of virtue and vice. What about drama? What about the tragic stage, that beating heart of Greek literature? Well, it's true. We find the Greek myths dramatized on stage and explored for what they have to teach us. But even there, the moral picture is messy and unclear. Greek myths, of which you will know many, each of you, often remind us that a human character flaw can bring about one's downfall. They remind us that the gods are not a paradigm of morality and will not tolerate humans being impious towards them. And they remind us that fate is inescapable, it's inevitable, and it's unknowable. So the picture that comes out of Greek drama, again, doesn't give us much of a virtuous code, an ethical code about which to think. And many a Greek tragedy ends with this old Greek wisdom that no human should be counted happy until the end of his or her life. That is to say, only on your last day can you round up the holistic picture of your life and say, well, all things being equal, it was okay. It's not until the 5th century then, in Athens, where we start getting genuine moral philosophy emerging. And by that, I mean directly thinking about what a good character and what a good life looks like. I've mentioned two words there, morals and ethics. They are the same word in Latin and in Greek. Moralia is about your mores, about your character, and ethics, ethika, is about your ethos, your character. And this is a new thing that emerges in the 5th century, thinking about your character as a route to understanding virtue and vice. But the picture is already so complex because of Homer, because of Greek myth, and because of drama, that in 5th century Athens, there's chaos about what the good and the bad look like. In fact, there's a professional class of people who take advantage of this confusion and argue that any particular attitude can be possible and persuasive. These are called the sophists. And the sophists were orators who were trained in making anything look plausible for the sake of whatever purpose you want. And the most famous of these is someone called Protagoras, whom you may have heard of. And Protagoras' most famous doctrine was that man is the measure of all things. And what that means is any individual is free to make of anything whatever they want. It's subjective. And for Protagoras and his school, you are allowed to make your own conventional morality on your own terms. There's no universal moral code. You just do what you want. Well, it's with that backdrop that a man all of you will know very well, Socrates emerges. And Socrates is the first serious thinker in the realm of moral philosophy. And he brings virtue to the fore. He says that virtue is sufficient for true happiness. What is happiness? Well, there's this word eudaimonia, which we find from this point in Greek, eudaimonia. And again, happiness is not a very good translation in English. It doesn't mean something nice happens and it makes you smile. It's about your holistic life and the blessings that you do or don't have. So a better translation might be well-being or human flourishing, something like that. Well, Socrates says something rather strange. It's not just that virtue is sufficient for happiness. It's that happiness is nothing more than knowing what virtue is. It's all about knowledge and about defining those virtues. And so if you turn to Socrates' dialogues, which are preserved by Plato, you will find him constantly trying to argue his way into understanding a term. And for Socrates, once you understand it, you are happy. How so? Well, for Socrates, you cannot knowingly do something you think is bad. Therefore, if you know the good of a virtue, you will act upon it because you now know the frame of what is good and bad. Two rather strange things follow from this. The first is that Socrates has no space in his theory for irrational desire. You can't have some desire that comes through you irrationally, which you end up acting upon. Now, we manifestly know that we all do this, so what would Socrates say about that reality? He would say what seems to be an irrational desire is us temporarily changing our minds into thinking that thing is good. So let's imagine you're having a drink, you know you shouldn't have one more drink, and then you do. In that context, for Socrates, you've reframed it and said, actually, the good thing for me is to have that drink. And then you've re-pivoted that after the drink when things went less well. The second oddity is that external goods, such as health, wealth, reputation, these for Socrates have no bearing on your happiness. You could be in poverty, you could be in disrepute, you could be in terrible physical pain. For Socrates, your eudaimonia is unchanged because you know true virtue. Now, clearly that's not going to be a fully workable theory for us as we think about virtues and vices. So we can move to Socrates' most famous pupil, Plato. Plato agrees that virtue is sufficient for happiness, but he disagrees that knowledge alone is sufficient. Instead, it's about your character and your soul within. Plato's fully aware that irrational desires happen all the time, and it's about controlling them. And Plato gives us this very striking image of our tripartite, our three-part soul. We have the logistikon, the rational part in our head. We have the thumoides, or the spirited part, in our chest, which has passions and emotions. And then we have the epithumaitikon, base bodily desires, in our stomach. Those three parts are to be kept in balance in Platonic theory. And to help us think about that, he regards the rational part as being like a charioteer. And that charioteer is trying to keep in control the other two parts, which have a better horse aiming for higher things, your emotions, and a worse horse aiming for lower things, your bodily appetites. And the rational soul is trying to balance and harmonize those two lower forces. So for Plato, virtue is balancing out those various parts of your soul so that a good outcome follows. And he introduces for the first time the 4 canonical virtues which map onto that picture. There's the virtue of practical wisdom, knowing what to do, phronesis. There's the virtue of being courageous to follow your emotions when you need to, which is andreia. There's the ability to control your own bodily appetites, temperance, Greek sophrosyner. And there's the justice, the dikaiosyner of balancing all of those things together. So for Plato, being able to balance your soul in that way brings about happiness. And although there are external goods, those external goods cannot remove the true happiness of the virtuous human. Well, Plato had a famous pupil, Aristotle, and Aristotle trained with Plato for 20 years before founding his own school. And Aristotle had some fundamental disagreements with the picture as given by Plato. He agreed that eudaimonia is what everyone wants in life, but he made eudaimonia the ultimate good, by which I mean every single thing we ever choose is ultimately on a path to achieving happiness. That means virtues are not happiness, but a means to being happy. They're a tool to allow us to make choices to get to this separate state of true happiness. And Aristotle talks at great length about how we enact those virtues. They're not about knowledge, they're not about character as such, they're about choice. And Aristotle introduces this idea, which is rather bizarre, but it works to some degree, that every virtue is the mean, the middle point between a vice of excess and a vice of deficiency. So vice, virtue, vice. If you imagine bravery, that's in the middle, but being too brave and foolhardy is a vice, and being so cowardly that you've got no bravery is a vice. Or if you think about generosity, that's a virtue, but if you're too generous and prodigal, no good, and if you're never generous and you're mean, no good. So the golden mean is a major part of Aristotle's ethical theory. And for him, it's all about habituation and practice to enact the correct choices that will lead to happiness. Now, just to set the scene for the rest of the day, I will close by briefly mentioning 2 other schools that come out of this period, the Epicureans and the Stoics. Very briefly, the Epicureans cared about pleasure, which is not a word I've said to this point. They cared about pleasure to the degree that not virtue, but pleasure is true happiness. But you only attain pleasure by reaching a sufficiently tranquil state that you have no pains in how you view the world. Virtues help with that, but some virtues get in the way of it. So for Epicureans, pleasure as the goal, as the hedonic telos, the thing you're aiming towards, means that some traditional virtues actually obstruct true happiness. Finally, I will close with the Stoics. The Stoics set the scene for what will follow because they go back to the Socratic idea that virtue alone is happiness. But they believe in a world where God controls everything, everything's determined and fated, and we as humans can't know what's going to happen. But if we live according to nature and the natural laws of the universe, we will act in harmony with what is fated. And it so happens that the virtues are a natural ordering that is good within us, such that if we are virtuous, we follow the law of nature and are therefore in harmony with God's plan on earth. Now, that sounds as though it sets the scene for Christianity, because it does indeed. Stoic ethics move through the Roman tradition into Christianity once it arrives. And I will end my introduction at that point.
Thank you very much, David. Please stay on the stage. Thank you for illuminating the main principles of virtue. Virtue could be either about personality or by character. What did the Greeks put most emphasize on?
Well, it varies. As I say, Ulf, you have some people believing it's entirely intellectual. If you know virtue, that makes you virtuous.
Yeah.
You have those who believe it's a physical state within you, and you have those who believe it's only seen in action. It's external outcomes of virtue. So it would be hard to generalize, given these different philosophical approaches, as to which is most important for whom.
And you also have the distinction between your eudaimonia and the eudaimonia of others.
Indeed. Yes.
And where did the
well,
again
I've said very little about politics, about friendship, and most people that I mentioned there agree that ethics and politics are intimately related. My eudaimonia cannot normally be obtained unless we have a balanced political relationship such that we both have the space in which to attain it.
How was it adopted by the Romans? I mean, the Greek society is very much focused on let's say, beauty. The individual Roman is state-building, empire, citizenship.
That's right. Well, very little happens philosophically in the Roman Republic. But in the 1st century BC, with the emergence of the empire, various of those competing schools come into play. Cicero supports Plato, Caesar supports the Epicureans, many emperors such as Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, Nero's advisor, support Stoicism, and they commingle in an interesting way until the arrival of Christianity. But I said very little about Rome, because I'm sad to say Rome offers comparatively very little philosophically compared to that rich Greek tradition I've summarized.
Last question, was this theory in ancient Greece, or was this a way of life to the ordinary Greek people?
Well, the ordinary Greek person was suspicious of the philosopher. Those were people who tended to hang around in public, give these lectures using all these strange terms.
Talking about virtue.
Exactly. So the average person just got on with it. But that's how it goes.
Thank you for this Socratic guide to
Very
this
kind.
day.
Thank you.